The sun had barely crested the horizon when Kane Lawson heard the sound of broken weeping echoing across the empty plains, leading him to the old stone well, where a woman in a torn calico dress sat with her face buried in her hands. He had been riding for 3 days straight, coming back from a cattle drive that stretched all the way to Denver, and his body ached with the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only the trail could bring. The year was 1878, and Leadville, Colorado was supposed to be his destination, a place where he could finally rest after months of pushing livestock across unforgiving terrain. But that sound, that desperate sobbing that seemed to cut through the morning air like a knife, made him pull his horse to a stop without thinking. Kane dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud as he approached the well with careful steps. She did not look up when he came closer, her shoulders shaking with each sob that tore through her slender frame. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from whatever pins had once held it, falling in tangled waves around her face and down her back. The dress she wore had been pretty once, he could tell, with small blue flowers printed on the fabric, but now it was stained with dirt and what looked like ash, torn at the hem and along one sleeve. "Miss," Kane said quietly, not wanting to startle her. His voice was rough from days of breathing trail dust, but he tried to make it gentle. "Miss, are you hurt?" The woman's head jerked up at his words, her tear-stained face revealing eyes so blue they reminded him of the sky on a clear winter day. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with delicate features that were currently twisted in anguish. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether he was real or some kind of mirage brought on by grief. "Go away," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Just go away and leave me be." Kane should have listened. He should have climbed back on his horse and ridden the last 5 miles into Leadville without looking back. But something in those devastated eyes held him rooted to the spot, and before he could stop himself, he was lowering himself to sit on the edge of the well, keeping a respectful distance but making it clear he was not leaving. "Cannot do that," he said simply. "Would not be right to leave a lady crying by herself in the middle of nowhere." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "A lady? I am no lady anymore. I am nothing." "That is not true," Kane said firmly. "Whatever happened to you, whatever brought you out here, it does not make you nothing." The woman turned away from him, hugging her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces of herself together. "You do not understand. You cannot possibly understand." "Then help me understand," Kane said. He pulled off his worn hat and set it on the stone beside him, running a hand through his dark hair. "My name is Kane Lawson, and I am a stranger passing through, which means you will never have to see me again after today if you do not want to. But right now, I am here, and I am listening." For a long moment she said nothing. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the sparse grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "My name is Beatrice Jenkins," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, I had a home. I had a future. I was engaged to be married to a man named Thomas Hendricks, the son of the wealthiest ranch owner in these parts. The wedding was supposed to be in 2 weeks. Kane waited, sensing there was more to come. "But then I found out the truth," Beatrice continued, her hands clenching into fists in her lap. "Thomas was not the man I thought he was. He had been courting me, yes, making all sorts of promises about the life we would build together. But it was all a lie. He only wanted to marry me because my father owned a small piece of land that sits between the Hendricks Ranch and the river. Water rights, you see. That land is worthless to anyone except the person who owns the property on either side of it." She drew in a shuddering breath. "My father died 2 years ago. It has just been me and my mother since then, struggling to keep the property, to keep a roof over our heads. When Thomas started paying attention to me, I thought it was a miracle. I thought he loved me, but I overheard him talking to his father last week. They were laughing about how easy it had been to fool the stupid Jenkins girl, how as soon as we were married, the land would be theirs, and they could finally control the water access for the entire valley. Kane felt anger stirring in his chest, hot and fierce. He had known men like that, men who saw people as nothing more than obstacles or tools to be used for their own gain. When I confronted Thomas about it, Beatrice went on, he did not even have the decency to deny it. He just laughed and said I should be grateful that someone from his family would even consider marrying me. He said I was plain and poor, and that without him, I would end up a spinster living in poverty. Her voice cracked on the last word, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, came 2 days ago. Thomas went to my mother and told her what had happened, except he twisted everything. He told her that I had tried to seduce him, that I had been inappropriate and forward, and that he could not possibly marry someone of such low moral character. He made it sound like I had ruined everything. Kane's jaw tightened. And your mother believed him. The Hendricks family has power in this territory, Beatrice said bitterly. Money and influence. My mother was so humiliated, so afraid of what people would say, that she told me I was no longer welcome in her home. She said I had brought shame on our family, that I had destroyed our one chance at security. She gave me $50 and told me to leave Leadville and never come back. She gestured helplessly at the empty landscape around them. So here I am. I spent last night sleeping under a tree, and I have no idea where to go or what to do. Everything I knew, everything I thought my life would be, is just gone. Kane sat in silence for a moment, absorbing everything she had told him. The injustice of it burned in his gut. The casual cruelty of people who had so much that they could destroy someone's entire life without a second thought. He had seen it before, out on the frontier where the law was often just a suggestion and power was the only thing that mattered. But knowing it happened did not make it any easier to stomach. Whatever broke you, Kane said finally, his voice steady and sure, I will help you build again. Beatrice turned to look at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. What? You heard me, Kane said, meeting her eyes without wavering. You did not deserve what happened to you, and I will be damned if I am going to ride away and leave you out here alone. I have some money saved up from the cattle drive, enough to get you a room at a boarding house and some decent clothes. We can figure out the rest as we go. But why? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Kane thought about that for a moment, trying to put into words the instinct that had made him stop when he heard her crying, the certainty he felt that this was the right thing to do. Because somebody should, he said simply. Because you are sitting here crying at a well in the middle of nowhere, and you need help, and I can give it. That is reason enough for me. Beatrice stared at him for a long moment, and Kane could see her struggling with whether to trust him. He could not blame her for being wary. She had just been betrayed by someone she thought loved her, and now here was a stranger making promises that probably sounded too good to be true. I do not have any way to repay you, she said finally. Did not ask you to repay me, Kane replied. He stood up and held out his hand to her. Come on. Let us get you into town and get you sorted out. You can decide what comes next once you have had a hot meal and a real bed to sleep in. Beatrice looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it, letting him help her to her feet. Her hand was small and cold in his, and he could feel her trembling. Kane picked up his hat and led her over to his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "We had a horse when my father was alive, but we sold it after he died." "All right," Kane said. He swung himself up into the saddle and then reached down to help pull Beatrice up behind him. She hesitated for just a second before accepting his help, settling herself behind the saddle and wrapping her arms lightly around his waist to keep her balance. Kane could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself stiffly as if afraid to get too close. "Hold on tight," he told her gently. "It is about 5 miles to Leadville, and the trail can get rough in places." As they rode, Kane kept the pace steady but not too fast, conscious of Beatrice's inexperience and exhaustion. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the cool morning air, and gradually he felt some of the tension leave her body as she realized he was not going to hurt her or take advantage of her vulnerable position. "Tell me about yourself," Beatrice said after they had been riding for about 20 minutes. Her voice was still hoarse from crying, but there was a note of curiosity in it now, as if she was trying to distract herself from her own troubles. "You said you were coming back from a cattle drive." "That is right," Kane confirmed. "I have been working as a ranch hand and cattle driver for the past 6 years, ever since I was 18. It is hard work, but honest, and it lets me see the country." "You have family?" Beatrice asked. Kane felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came when he thought about his past. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. My older brother Marcus raised me for a couple years after that, but he was killed in a mining accident up in Montana when I was 18. After that, I just started drifting, taking work where I could find it." "I am sorry," Beatrice said softly, and Kane could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. "That must have been very difficult." "It was what it was," Kane said, though his voice was rougher than he intended. "But it taught me to recognize when someone needs help, because I remember what it felt like to have nobody. After Marcus died, I was angry at the world for a long time. A ranch owner named Samuel Cross took a chance on me when nobody else would, gave me work and a place to sleep, and taught me that not everyone is out to use you. I have tried to pay that forward when I can." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, and Kane found himself very aware of Beatrice's presence behind him, the way her arms had relaxed around his waist, the soft sound of her breathing. There was something about her that called to him, though he could not quite name what it was. Maybe it was the strength he could sense underneath the heartbreak, the core of steel that had kept her going even after everything had fallen apart. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just that when he had looked into her eyes, something had shifted in his chest, a feeling like recognition, like coming home. Leadville came into view about an hour later, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley between towering peaks. The town had exploded in recent years thanks to the silver strikes in the area, and now it was a chaotic mixture of hastily built wooden structures, canvas tents, and more permanent brick buildings. The streets were crowded with miners, prospectors, businessmen, and all the people who came to make their fortune off of those seeking riches. Kane guided Copper through the busy main street, ignoring the curious looks that some people gave them. He knew what they were probably thinking, seeing a dusty cowboy with a disheveled young woman riding behind him, but he did not care. He had a destination in mind, a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patricia Coleman, who he had stayed with before and knew to be both kind and discreet. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden building painted a cheerful yellow, with white shutters and a small garden out front where Mrs. Coleman grew vegetables and herbs. Kane tied Copper to the hitching post and helped Beatrice dismount, steadying her when her legs proved shaky after the ride. "This is a good place," he told her. "Mrs. Coleman is fair, and she will not ask questions you do not want to answer." Beatrice nodded, though she looked nervous as they climbed the steps to the front porch. Kane knocked, and a moment later the door swung open to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with graying brown hair and sharp but kind eyes. "Kane Lawson," Mrs. Coleman said, a smile breaking across her face. "I heard you were coming back from the Denver drive. Come in, come in." Then her gaze shifted to Beatrice and her expression grew concerned. "Oh, you poor dear, you look like you have been through the ringer." "Mrs. Coleman, this is Miss Beatrice Jenkins," Kane said. "She is in need of a room and some assistance. I can pay for the first month in advance." Mrs. Coleman waved a hand dismissively. "We can talk about payment later. Come inside, both of you." She ushered them into a cozy sitting room filled with comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh bread. "Miss Jenkins, you sit right there and let me get you some tea. Kane, you come with me to the kitchen." Kane followed Mrs. Coleman to the back of the house, where she immediately rounded on him with her hands on her hips. "What happened to that girl?" she demanded in a low voice. Kane gave her a condensed version of what Beatrice had told him, watching as Mrs. Coleman's expression grew progressively more outraged. "That Hendricks boy," she spat when he finished. "I have heard stories about that family. Think they own this whole territory, and her mother just threw her out." "What kind of woman does that to her own child? A scared one," Kane said quietly. "But that does not make it right." "No, it certainly does not," Mrs. Coleman agreed. She studied Kane's face for a moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You have got a soft spot for her." It was not a question, but Kane answered anyway. "I could not just leave her out there." "No, I suppose you could not," Mrs. Coleman said, and there was something almost sad in her smile. "You always did have too much heart for your own good, Kane Lawson. All right, I will get her settled. She can stay in the room at the end of the hall upstairs. And you are right that she needs some new clothes. Those rags she is wearing are barely decent." "I can give you money for that too," Kane said, but Mrs. Coleman shook her head. "I've got some dresses that belonged to my daughter before she moved to San Francisco," she said. "They should fit Miss Jenkins well enough until we can get her to a proper seamstress. You save your money. Something tells me you are going to need it." They returned to the sitting room, where Beatrice was perched on the edge of a chair looking lost and overwhelmed. Mrs. Coleman immediately took charge, bustling around and giving orders in the kind but firm tone of someone who was used to managing a household. "First things first, you need a bath and some clean clothes," she told Beatrice. "Then food and then sleep. You look like you have not had any of those things in far too long. Kane, you make yourself useful and go get some supplies from the general store. I will give you a list." Kane found himself being shooed toward the door with a long list of items that Mrs. Coleman needed, but before he left, he caught Beatrice's eye. She looked terrified at the prospect of him leaving, even for a little while, and he felt his heart clench. "I will be back in less than an hour," he promised her. "You are safe here, I give you my word." Beatrice nodded slowly, and Kane saw her take a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Kane just tipped his hat to her and headed out, trying to ignore the strange feeling in his chest that made him want to stay. He spent the next hour gathering supplies from the general store, including things that Mrs. Coleman had not asked for, but that he thought might be useful. He bought good quality soap and a brush for Beatrice's hair, a warm shawl for the cool mountain evenings, and a few books that he thought she might enjoy reading. When he returned to the boarding house, Mrs. Coleman met him at the door with a satisfied expression. "She is sleeping," she reported. "Poor thing was exhausted. I got her bathed and fed, and she was asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow." "That is good," Kane said, handing over the supplies. He hesitated, not quite sure what to do with himself now. I should probably go find myself a room somewhere. Nonsense, Mrs. Coleman said briskly. I've got a room for you two, same one you stayed in last time you were in town. I assume you will be sticking around for a while to make sure Miss Jenkins gets settled. Kane had not really thought about it in concrete terms, but as soon as Mrs. Coleman said it, he knew it was true. Yeah, he said, I will stay for a while. Good, Mrs. Coleman said with a decisive nod. That girl needs a friend, Kane. She needs someone she can trust. Do not let her down. I would not, Kane said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The next few days fell into a pattern. Kane found work at one of the local stables, mucking out stalls and caring for horses, which gave him a steady income and kept him busy during the day. In the evenings, he would return to the boarding house and have dinner with Mrs. Coleman, Beatrice, and the handful of other boarders who lived there. Beatrice was quiet at first, speaking only when spoken to and keeping her eyes downcast, but slowly, bit by bit, Kane saw her starting to come back to life. It started with small things. The way she smiled when Mrs. Coleman told a funny story about one of her other boarders. The interest that sparked in her eyes when Kane mentioned he had bought her some books. The gradual relaxation of her shoulders as she realized that nobody here was going to judge her or hurt her. One evening about a week after Kane had found her at the well, he was sitting on the front porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set behind the mountains and enjoying the cool evening air. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Beatrice stepping out, wrapped in the shawl he had bought for her. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course," Kane said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. Beatrice sat down and pulled the shawl more tightly around her shoulders. For a while they just sat in companionable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. "I never thanked you properly," Beatrice said finally, "for what you did for me, for what you are still doing." "You do not need to thank me," Kane said. "Yes, I do," Beatrice insisted. She turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes seemed to glow. "You saved my life, Kane. Maybe not in the literal sense, but in every way that matters. I was so lost, so broken, and you helped me when you had absolutely no reason to. That means something." Kane felt heat creeping up his neck and was grateful for the dim light that hid his reaction. "You would have figured it out," he said gruffly. "You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," Beatrice said softly, "but I do not think I would have made it without you." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "Mrs. Coleman told me I can work for her, helping with the cooking and cleaning and managing the boarding house. It will not pay much, but it will be enough to cover my room and board and leave a little left over. I wanted you to know that I am going to be all right. You do not have to keep taking care of me." Something cold settled in Kane's stomach at her words, though he tried not to let it show on his face. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No," Beatrice said quickly, and then she blushed. "I mean, that is not what I meant. I just do not want you to feel obligated to stay in Leadville because of me. You said you like to move around to see the country. I do not want to be the thing that holds you back." Kane was quiet for a moment, trying to sort through the tangle of feelings in his chest. The truth was, he had been thinking about leaving. It was what he always did, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots or form attachments that could be broken. But the thought of riding away from Leadville, of leaving Beatrice behind, made something in him rebel. "What if I do not want to leave?" he said finally, his voice low. Beatrice's breath caught. "What?" Kane turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face in the gathering darkness. "I have been drifting for 6 years, Beatrice. Moving from job to job, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. But being here, spending time with you these past days, It has made me wonder if maybe I have been running from the wrong thing." "Kane," Beatrice whispered, and he could hear the uncertainty and hope warring in her voice. "I know it has only been a week," Kane continued. "I know that is not long enough to really know someone, and I know you have been through hell and probably are not ready to think about anything beyond getting through each day. But I need you to know that I am not staying in Leadville out of obligation. I am staying because I want to. Because when I think about leaving, about not seeing you every day, it feels wrong." Beatrice was staring at him with wide eyes, and in the dim light he could see tears beginning to gather. "I thought I was imagining it," she said softly. "The way you look at me sometimes, the way you always seem to know what I need before I ask. I thought I was just being foolish, reading things that were not there because I wanted so badly for someone to care." "You were not imagining it," Kane said. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were delicate and soft, so different from his own calloused and scarred hands, but they fit together perfectly. "From the moment I saw you at that well, something just clicked into place. I cannot explain it better than that. I just know that I want to be here with you, helping you build a new life. And if you will let me, I want to be part of that life." A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek, but she was smiling, a real genuine smile that transformed her face and took Kane's breath away. "I want that too," she said. "I was so afraid to hope, so afraid to trust my own feelings after everything that happened with Thomas. But what I feel when I am with you is nothing like what I felt with him. With Thomas, I was always trying to be someone I thought he wanted me to be. With you, I can just be myself." Kane raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "That is all I want you to be," he said. "Just yourself. That is more than enough." They sat there on the porch holding hands until full dark fell and Mrs. Coleman called them in for supper, and Kane felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt in years. It felt like peace. It felt like home. Over the following weeks, Kane and Beatrice grew closer. They would take walks through Leadville in the evenings, with Kane pointing out interesting sights and Beatrice slowly relaxing into genuine laughter and conversation. She told him about her childhood, about her father who had been a schoolteacher before moving west to try his hand at farming, about her mother who had once been warm and loving, but had grown hard and fearful after her husband's death. Kane, in turn, told her about his own past, about growing up in a small town in Kansas, about his mother who had made the best apple pie he had ever tasted, and his father who had taught him to ride and rope. About Marcus, his brother who had been equal parts protector and tormentor, and whose death had left a hole in Kane's life that he had been trying to fill ever since. "I think he would have liked you," Kane said one evening as they sat by the small creek that ran along the edge of town. "Marcus always said I needed someone who would not take any of my nonsense." Beatrice laughed, a sound that Kane had come to treasure. "I do not think you have that much nonsense to take," she said. "You are about the most straightforward person I have ever met." "That is because you have not seen me try to cook," Kane said with a grin. "Mrs. Coleman banned me from her kitchen after I somehow managed to burn water." "You cannot burn water," Beatrice protested, still laughing. "That is what I thought too," Kane said solemnly, "but I proved us both wrong." It was in moments like these, filled with laughter and easy companionship, that Kane felt the last of his walls crumbling. He had spent so long protecting himself from caring too much, from letting anyone get close enough to hurt him, but Beatrice had slipped past every defense he had without even trying. About a month after Kane had found Beatrice at the well, they were walking back from the general store when they encountered Thomas Hendricks on the street. Kane recognized him immediately from Beatrice's description. tall and broad-shouldered with slicked-back hair and expensive clothes that were too fancy for the dusty streets of Leadville. Thomas was with two other men, probably ranch hands from his father's property, and all three of them stopped dead when they saw Beatrice. Kane felt Beatrice stiffen beside him, her hand tightening on his arm. He laid his own hand over hers, a silent message of support and protection. "Well, well," Thomas said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "If it is not Beatrice Jenkins, I heard you were still in town. I thought surely by now you would have had the decency to leave." "I have every right to be here," Beatrice said, and Kane was proud of how steady her voice was despite the fact that he could feel her trembling. Thomas's gaze shifted to Kane, his eyes narrowing. "And who is this? Have you found yourself another fool to trick?" Kane felt anger surge through him, hot and fierce, but he kept his voice calm and level. "My name is Kane Lawson, and I suggest you watch how you speak to the lady." "Lady?" Thomas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She is no lady. She is a conniving little opportunist who tried to trap me into marriage. I did this town a favor by exposing her for what she really is." "That is not true," Beatrice said, her voice shaking now with emotion. "You know that is not true. You were the one who was using me, who lied to me about everything." "Prove it," Thomas said with a cruel smile. "Go ahead, tell everyone your version of events, see who they believe. The son of one of the most powerful families in Colorado, or a penniless nobody whose own mother threw her out." Kane had heard enough. He stepped forward, putting himself between Beatrice and Thomas. "This conversation is over," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "You need to walk away now before you say something you are going to regret." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "Are you threatening me, Cowboy?" "I am giving you a chance to leave with your dignity intact," Kane said. "But if you keep talking to Beatrice that way, we are going to have a problem." For a moment, Thomas looked like he might take a swing at Kane. But then one of his companions put a hand on his arm, murmuring something Kane could not hear, and Thomas seemed to think better of it. "This is not over," he said, pointing a finger at Beatrice. "My father has filed a complaint with the territorial judge about your family's land rights. Once we are done, you and your mother will not have anything left." He turned and strode away, his companions following, leaving Kane and Beatrice standing in the street. Beatrice was shaking in earnest now, and Kane gently guided her to a bench outside the general store and helped her sit down. "Breathe," he told her softly. "Just breathe. He is gone." "Did you hear what he said?" Beatrice asked, her voice tight with panic. "About my mother's land. That is her whole livelihood, Kane. If the Hendricks family takes that from her, she will have nothing." "He might have been bluffing," Kane said, though he did not really believe it. Men like Thomas Hendricks did not make threats they could not back up. "No," Beatrice said, shaking her head. "You do not know them. They have lawyers and judges in their pocket. If they want that land, they will find a way to get it." She looked up at Kane with stricken eyes. "My mother may have thrown me out, but she is still my mother. I cannot just stand by and let them destroy her." Kane thought for a moment, his mind working through the problem. "Do you know if your mother has a will, some kind of legal documentation about who inherits the land if something happens to her?" "I do not know," Beatrice admitted. "She never talked about things like that." "Then that is where we start," Kane said decisively. "We need to find out exactly what the legal situation is with your mother's land, and we need to do it before the Hendricks family can make their move." Beatrice looked at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You would help with this, even though it is my problem, not yours." Kane took her face gently in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made his feelings crystal clear. "Your problems are my problems," he said simply. "We are in this together, Beatrice. Whatever comes, we face it as a team." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, but she was smiling as she leaned forward and kissed him. It was the first time their lips had met, and Kane felt the world fall away until there was nothing but the softness of her mouth against his, the taste of salt from her tears, the rightness of holding her close. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you," Beatrice whispered. "I know it is fast. I know people will say it is too soon, but I do not care. I love you, Kane Lawson." "I love you too," Kane said, and the words felt like a vow, like a promise written in stone. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you crying at that well." They sat there on the bench holding each other while the people of Leadville went about their business around them, and Kane felt a certainty settle in his bones. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever fights they would have to face, they would do it together, and that made all the difference. The next day, Kane and Beatrice rode out to visit her mother. The Jenkins property was about 10 miles outside of Leadville, a small plot of land with a modest cabin and a barn that had seen better days. As they approached, Kane could see a woman working in the garden, her movements stiff and tired. Margaret Jenkins looked up as they drew near, and Kane saw the way her face went pale when she recognized her daughter. She was in her late 40s, with dark blonde hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years of hard living. There was a resemblance between her and Beatrice, though Margaret's features were sharper, hardened by disappointment and fear. "What are you doing here?" Margaret demanded, straightening up and wiping her hands on her apron. "I told you not to come back." "Mother, please," Beatrice said, dismounting from Copper with Kane's help. "I need to talk to you. It is important." "I have got nothing to say to you," Margaret said, but Kane could hear the waver in her voice, the uncertainty beneath the harsh words. "The Hendricks family is trying to take your land," Beatrice said bluntly. "Thomas told me they have filed some kind of legal complaint. I came to warn you and to see if there is anything we can do to help." Margaret's face went even paler, and for a moment she swayed on her feet. Kane stepped forward instinctively, ready to catch her if she fell, but she steadied herself with visible effort. "How do you know about that?" Margaret asked hoarsely. "We ran into Thomas in town yesterday," Beatrice explained. "He was bragging about it, trying to hurt me." "But Mother, you need to understand what is really happening here. The Hendricks family never cared about me. Thomas was just using me to get access to this land. Everything that happened, the broken engagement, the rumors he spread about me, it was all part of their plan." "That is not true," Margaret said, but she sounded less certain now. "Thomas is a good man from a good family. You must have done something to make him change his mind about marrying you." Kane could see the pain flash across Beatrice's face at her mother's words, and he felt anger kindle in his chest. But Beatrice held up a hand, stopping him from speaking. "I heard him talking to his father," Beatrice said quietly. "He said marrying me would give them control of your water rights. He said I was plain and poor, and that I should be grateful he was willing to marry me at all. And when I confronted him about it, he laughed in my face. Then he went to you and lied about what happened because he knew you would believe him over me." Margaret was shaking her head, but Kane could see doubt creeping into her expression. "Why would he do that? Why would he go to so much trouble?" "Because this land is worth a fortune to whoever controls the water access," Kane said, speaking for the first time. "With your property, the Hendricks family could monopolize the water rights for this entire valley. Every ranch, every farm, every business would have to pay them for access. That is worth far more than whatever it would have cost Thomas to marry your daughter." Margaret sank down onto the porch steps, all the fight seeming to drain out of her. "Oh God," she whispered. "What have I done?" Beatrice moved to sit beside her mother, though she kept a careful distance. "You made a mistake," she said gently. You were scared and worried about the future, and you believed the wrong person. But it is not too late to fix this." "How?" Margaret asked, looking up with desperate eyes. "The Hendricks family has lawyers and money and influence. I am just one woman trying to hold onto a worthless piece of land." "It is not worthless," Kane said firmly. "And you are not alone." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, a letter he had gotten from the land office in town that morning after doing some research. "I did some checking. The land deed is still in your name, and there is no legal basis for the Hendricks family to claim it. The complaint they filed is based on some old territorial law that does not actually apply to your situation. But they are counting on you not having the resources to fight them in court." Margaret took the letter with shaking hands, scanning the official-looking text. "I cannot afford a lawyer," she said hopelessly. "I can," Kane said. "I've got money saved, and I know a good lawyer in Denver who owes me a favor. I can get him here within a week to start building your defense." "Why would you do that?" Margaret asked, looking at him with confusion and suspicion. "You do not know me. You have got no stake in this." "I am doing it for Beatrice," Kane said simply. "Because she loves you even after everything that has happened, and because it is the right thing to do." Margaret turned to look at her daughter, really look at her, and Kane saw tears beginning to gather in the older woman's eyes. "Beatrice, I am so sorry," she choked out. "I was so scared of what people would say, of what would happen to us without the Hendricks family's protection. I did not stop to think about what I was doing to you, how much I was hurting you." "I know, Mother," Beatrice said, and Kane could hear the tears in her voice too. "I was angry at first, so angry I thought I would never be able to forgive you. But Kane helped me see that fear makes people do terrible things sometimes. It does not excuse what you did, but I understand why you did it." Margaret reached out hesitantly, and Beatrice took her hand. They sat there on the porch steps, holding hands and crying, and Kane felt his throat get tight with emotion. He turned away to give them a moment of privacy, scanning the property and thinking about what would need to be done to secure it against the Hendricks family's legal maneuvering. After a while, Margaret invited them inside for coffee. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished, but clean and well kept. They sat around the kitchen table, and Margaret told them about the letter she had received from the Hendricks family's lawyer 2 weeks earlier, demanding that she vacate the property or face legal action. "I have been too afraid to even open it fully," she admitted. "I did not know what to do, who to turn to." "Well, now you have got help," Kane said firmly. "The first thing we need to do is get all your paperwork in order, land deed, water rights documentation, anything that proves your legal ownership. Then we need to get that lawyer here and start building a case." They spent the next several hours going through Margaret's documents, which were fortunately in better order than she had thought. By the time the sun was setting, they had compiled everything the lawyer would need. "I will send a telegram to Denver tonight," Kane said, as he and Beatrice prepared to ride back to Leadville. "Samuel Pierce is one of the best lawyers in Colorado, and he helped me out of a bad situation a few years back. He will come." "I do not know how to thank you," Margaret said. She looked at Beatrice, her expression full of regret and shame. "Either of you. I do not deserve this kindness, not after what I did." "You are my mother," Beatrice said simply. "And despite everything, I still love you. We will get through this together." On the ride back to Leadville, Beatrice was quiet, lost in thought. Kane let her be, sensing she needed time to process the emotional reunion with her mother. But as they neared town, she finally spoke. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "For helping my mother, even though she does not deserve it." "She made a mistake," Kane said. "A big one, and one that hurt you deeply. But people are allowed to make mistakes and try to make them right. That is what second chances are for." "You are a better person than I am," Beatrice said. No, Kane said firmly. I am just a person who has been given second chances himself and knows how much they matter. Besides, he added with a small smile, helping your mother makes you happy, and making you happy is all I want to do. Beatrice reached over and squeezed his hand, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. Samuel Pierce arrived in Leadville a week later, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and an air of competent authority. He met with Margaret, Beatrice, and Kane at the boarding house, reviewing the documents and asking pointed questions about the Hendricks family's actions. This is an intimidation tactic, pure and simple, he announced after several hours of review. They have got no legal leg to stand on, but they are hoping you will be too scared or too ignorant to fight back. The territorial law they are citing was overturned 5 years ago. Any judge worth their salt will throw this out immediately. But what if the judge is in the Hendricks family's pocket? Margaret asked nervously. Then we go over his head to the Territorial Supreme Court in Denver, Samuel said with a confident smile. I've got connections there, and they do not take kindly to this kind of corruption. Trust me, Mrs. Jenkins, you are going to keep your land. The court hearing was set for 3 weeks later, and in that time, Kane threw himself into helping Margaret prepare the property for whatever came next. He spent his days riding out to her cabin and working on repairs that had been long neglected, fixing the barn roof, mending fences, cleaning out the well. Beatrice came with him most days, working alongside him and her mother to restore the property to something resembling prosperity. It was hard work, but Kane found a deep satisfaction in it. There was something right about building instead of just drifting, about putting down roots and creating something that would last. And working side by side with Beatrice, seeing her smile as they made progress, feeling the brush of her hand against his when they reached for the same tool, it all felt like a promise of the future they could build together. The night before the hearing, Kane and Beatrice sat on the porch of the boarding house under a blanket of stars. Beatrice was nervous, her hands twisting in her lap, and Kane covered them with his own to still them. It is going to be all right, he told her quietly. What if it is not? Beatrice asked. What if they win somehow? What if my mother loses everything? Then we will figure something out, Kane said. We will build something new. That is what we do, remember? Whatever breaks, we build again. Beatrice looked at him with such love and trust in her eyes that Kane felt his breath catch. How did I get so lucky? She whispered. To have you find me when I needed you most. I think I am the lucky one, Kane said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I have been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment, but I am starting to think there is no such thing as the perfect time. There is just now, and the promise of tomorrow. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. It is not much, he said, suddenly nervous. I know you probably imagined something fancier when you thought about getting married, but Beatrice, I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this world. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life building a future with you? Beatrice was crying, but she was smiling too, a radiant expression of pure joy. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I do not care about fancy rings or big weddings. All I want is you, Kane, just you. Kane slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a promise and a celebration all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. I want to do this right, Kane said. I want to ask your mother for her blessing. She will say yes, Beatrice assured him. She already thinks you walk on water after everything you have done for her. Still, Kane said, it is important to me. I want there to be no doubt that I am committed to you, to us, to building a life together. The next morning, they all traveled to the courthouse in Leadville for the hearing. The courtroom was packed with people, many of whom had come just to see the spectacle of the Jenkins family taking on the powerful Hendricks clan. Kane sat beside Beatrice and Margaret, providing silent support while Samuel Pierce laid out their case with precision and authority. The Hendricks family's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, tried to bluster and intimidate, but Samuel shot down every argument with facts and precedent. The judge, a stern-looking man named Harrison Cole, listened to both sides with an impassive expression. When it came time for his ruling, Judge Cole looked directly at the Hendricks family's lawyer. "I have reviewed the territorial statutes you cited, and I find them to be not only outdated but completely inapplicable to this case. Mrs. Margaret Jenkins has clear and legal title to her property, and there is no basis whatsoever for your claim. This complaint is dismissed with prejudice, and I am fining the Hendricks family $1,000 for bringing a frivolous lawsuit designed to intimidate and defraud a private citizen." The courtroom erupted in noise, some people cheering and others gasping in shock. Thomas Hendricks, who had been sitting with his father in the front row, turned purple with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The law had spoken, and for once it had sided with the little person instead of the powerful. Outside the courthouse, Margaret broke down in tears of relief, hugging both Beatrice and Kane. "Thank you," she kept saying over and over. "Thank you both so much." "Mother," Beatrice said, taking her hand, "Kane has something he wants to ask you." Margaret looked at Kane with questioning eyes, and he felt his heart start to pound. But he had faced down angry bulls and dangerous storms, had survived losing everyone he loved and starting over from nothing. He could do this. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said formally, "I know I have not known your daughter for very long, and I know the circumstances of how we met were unusual. But I love Beatrice with all my heart, and I want to spend the rest of my life making her happy. I would like to ask for your blessing to marry her." Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were happy ones. "You saved us," she said simply. "You saved my daughter when I failed her, and you saved me when I did not deserve it. Of course you have my blessing. I cannot think of anyone I would rather have as a son-in-law." Beatrice threw her arms around Kane's neck, laughing and crying at the same time, and he held her close, feeling the joy and rightness of the moment sink into his bones. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Leadville. Mrs. Coleman helped Beatrice make her dress, a beautiful creation of white lace and satin that made her look like an angel. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, but they were tears of happiness this time. Samuel Pierce stood as Kane's best man, and Mrs. Coleman served as Beatrice's maid of honor. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kane kissed Beatrice with all the love and promise he felt in his heart, and the small congregation of friends and well-wishers cheered. It was not a grand society wedding like the one Beatrice would have had with Thomas Hendricks, but it was real and true and filled with people who genuinely cared about them, and that made it perfect. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in a room that Mrs. Coleman had decorated with flowers and candles. Kane was nervous, worried about doing something wrong, but Beatrice took his face in her hands and kissed him with such love and trust that all his worries melted away. "I love you," she whispered as they lay together afterward, her head resting on his chest. "I cannot believe that just a few months ago I was sitting at that well thinking my life was over, and now here I am, married to the most wonderful man I have ever known." "I love you too," Kane said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And this is just the beginning, Beatrice. We have got a whole lifetime ahead of us to build something amazing together." They decided to settle permanently in Leadville. Kane had saved enough money that, Combined with what they could make from carefully investing in some of the local silver mines, they were able to purchase a small ranch just outside of town. It was not much at first, just 20 acres with a modest house and a barn, but it was theirs. Kane found work as a foreman at one of the larger ranches in the area, a job that paid well and allowed him to use all the skills he had learned in his years of drifting. Beatrice started a small business making and selling preserves and baked goods, and her products quickly became popular throughout Leadville. Together, they slowly built their ranch into something prosperous, adding cattle and chickens and eventually a pair of horses. Margaret became a regular visitor, and slowly, the relationship between mother and daughter healed. It was not instantaneous, and there were difficult conversations and tears along the way, but they worked through it together. Kane watched with pride as Beatrice stood her ground when necessary, but also extended grace and forgiveness when her mother truly earned it. 2 years after their wedding, Beatrice gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy they named Marcus after Kane's late brother. Kane held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the fierce love and protectiveness that surged through him. Marcus had Kane's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he came into the world, he had both of his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. "He is perfect," Beatrice whispered from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "Just like his mother," Kane said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. 15 months later, they welcomed a daughter they named Grace. She was smaller than Marcus had been, with pale blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. Between the 2 children and the ranch and their businesses, life was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. On slow evenings, when the children were asleep and the chores were done, Kane and Beatrice would sit on their porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked about their days, sharing the small victories and frustrations of ranch life. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and being together. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening when Marcus was 4 and Grace was nearly 3. "Stopping your wandering to settle down here?" Kane looked at her in genuine surprise. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "Beatrice, before I met you, I was just drifting through life, never staying anywhere long enough to matter, but you gave me a home. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a family. Why would I ever regret that? I just worry sometimes," Beatrice admitted, "that you gave up your freedom for me." Kane turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said intently. "I was not free before I met you. I was running from pain and loss and the fear of caring too much about anything. You did not trap me, Beatrice. You freed me. You showed me that it was okay to love, to hope, to build something that lasts. I have never been happier than I am right now in this moment with you." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, and Kane wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that as the stars came out one by one, painting the sky with points of light. Over the years, their ranch continued to grow. They added more land, more cattle, and eventually built a larger house to accommodate their expanding family. Margaret moved into a small cottage on their property, content to spend her later years near her daughter and grandchildren. She doted on Marcus and Grace, and later on their 2 younger siblings, a boy they named Thomas and a girl they named Rose. The choice of the name Thomas had been Beatrice's idea, and Kane had been skeptical at first. "After everything that man did to you?" he asked, but Beatrice shook her head. "Thomas Hendricks does not own that name," she said firmly. "And I refuse to let his cruelty taint something as simple as a name. Our son will be nothing like him. He will be kind and honest and true, everything Thomas Hendricks was not. That is how we take the power back." Kane had agreed, and true to Beatrice's prediction, young Thomas grew into a gentle, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Rose was the wild one, always getting into mischief and keeping her parents on their toes. The Hendricks family never recovered from the court case. The fine and the public humiliation had damaged their reputation, and soon other people came forward with stories of similar schemes and intimidation tactics. Within 5 years, they had sold off most of their holdings and left Colorado entirely. Kane heard rumors that they had moved to California and were trying to start over, but he never knew for certain, and he did not particularly care. They were a chapter from Beatrice's past that was firmly closed. When Marcus was 15 and starting to show interest in running the ranch himself, Kane took him aside for a serious conversation. They rode out to the northern boundary of their property, where a creek ran clear and cold down from the mountains. "Your mother and I have been talking," Kane said as they let their horses drink. "This ranch will be yours someday, son. Yours and your siblings. But before you decide that is what you want, I want you to take some time to figure out who you are and what you want from life." Marcus looked confused. "But I love the ranch, Papa. I cannot imagine doing anything else." "Maybe that is true," Kane said, "but you are 15 years old. You have not seen much of the world beyond Leadville. Your grandmother has offered to pay for you to go to school in Denver for a year, to get some education and experience. I want you to take that opportunity." "But the ranch needs me," Marcus protested. Kane smiled. "The ranch will still be here when you get back. And if you decide after a year that this is truly what you want, then you will come back with knowledge and skills that will make you an even better rancher. But if you discover something else that calls to you, well, that is all right too. The important thing is that you choose your own path, not just follow the one laid out for you." Marcus thought about that for a long moment. "Is that what you did, Papa? Chose your own path?" "Not at first," Kane admitted. "For a long time after my brother died, I was just running, not really choosing anything. But then I found your mother, and suddenly I had a reason to stop running and start building. That was when I truly chose my path, and it has made all the difference." In the end, Marcus did go to school in Denver, and he thrived there, though he ultimately decided that ranch life was indeed his calling. Grace, on the other hand, discovered a passion for teaching and eventually opened a school in Leadville. Thomas became a veterinarian, much to everyone's delight, and Rose married a silver miner and moved to Aspen, though she visited often. As Kane and Beatrice grew older, they gradually handed over more and more of the ranch's operations to Marcus and his new wife, a smart, capable woman named Alina. But they stayed active, Kane still working with the horses he loved and Beatrice still making her famous preserves and entertaining their ever-growing collection of grandchildren. One summer evening, 30 years after the day Kane had found Beatrice crying at the well, they rode out together to that same spot. It had become a tradition for them, visiting this place on their anniversary, remembering the day their lives had changed forever. The well was still there, though it was overgrown now with wildflowers and grass. They dismounted and sat on the stone edge, just as Kane had done all those years ago when he had first offered his help to a broken-hearted woman he did not even know. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you had just ridden past that day?" Beatrice asked. Her hair was silver now, and lines of age and laughter marked her face, but to Kane she was just as beautiful as she had been at 23. "Every day," Kane said honestly. "And every day I thank God that I did not." He took her hand, his own weathered and scarred from a lifetime of hard work. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, you know, maybe more." "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. She leaned her head on his shoulder and Kane pressed a kiss to her hair. "Whatever broke us, we built again. Together." "Together," Kane agreed. "Always together." They sat there as the sun set, casting long shadows across the prairie. Two people who had found each other at their lowest point and built a lifetime of love and happiness from the rubble of their broken dreams. Around them, the land they had worked so hard to build stretched in every direction, a testament to what could be created when two people chose to face the world side by side. Kane thought about all the years of drifting that had led him to this well on that fateful morning. Every hardship, every loss, every lonely mile had been worth it to bring him to Beatrice. And everything that had come after, the struggles and the triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments, had all been woven together into a life that was richer and more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. "I would do it all again," he said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every difficult choice if it meant ending up here with you." Beatrice lifted her head to look at him, her blue eyes still as clear and captivating as they had been 3 decades earlier. "So would I," she said. "So would I." As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear, they mounted their horses and rode home together, their hands linked between them, their hearts beating in the same rhythm they had found that day at the well. Behind them, the wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze, marking the spot where two broken souls had found each other, and in finding each other, had found themselves. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached, and they could hear the sounds of their family gathered inside, children and grandchildren filling the home with life and love and laughter. Kane helped Beatrice dismount and they stood for a moment in the yard, looking at what they had built together. "Home," Beatrice said softly. "Home," Kane agreed, pulling her close. And as they walked hand in hand toward the house, toward the family and the life they had created from nothing but determination and love, Kane knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not a life without hardship or pain, but a life where those things were faced together, where breaking was not the end but simply the beginning of building something even stronger. Whatever had broken them all those years ago was long since healed, rebuilt into something beautiful and enduring. And in the years to come, as they watched their children build their own lives and their grandchildren grow into people of strength and character, Kane and Beatrice would continue to face each day the same way they had faced all the days since that morning at the well, hand in hand, heart to heart, building and rebuilding their life together until the very end. It was the kind of love story that people told around fires and passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when everything seems lost, there is always the possibility of finding someone who will help you build again. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that person becomes not just your savior but your partner, your love, your home. Kane and Beatrice Lawson lived long lives filled with purpose and joy, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had nurtured. And when they finally passed, many years later and within days of each other as long-time married couples sometimes do, they left behind a legacy that would echo through generations. The simple truth that love, real love, was not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who would stand beside you and help you build something beautiful from the broken pieces of your life. Their graves were placed on a hill overlooking their ranch, marked with simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription chosen by their children. Whatever broke them, they built again, together. And on summer evenings when the wind blew just right, people said you could hear the echo of laughter carried on the breeze, two souls still building, still loving, still together.